are in listen-only mode.
Um, Welcome to the Vivo Ed Chat. My name's Colin Brown, Director of Engagement at Vivo Miles. And if you've not joined one of our web chats before, then please follow them on Twitter, hashtag Vivo Ed Chat. We run them every Thursday at 4 o'clock. And this afternoon, we are joined by Colin Forrest, who basically is going to be talking about Ofsted and improvement. So, good afternoon, Colin.
Hi, Colin. Sorry about any confusion. I'm looking forward to the next hour or so a great deal. A little bit about my background. I spent the first 10 years of my career as a school teacher, science and maths. I enjoyed that a lot, and then moved into further education for perhaps another 15 years, and then moved on to the funding agency, the Learning and Skills Council, where I was Learning and Quality Director up here in Yorkshire, where the sun is just setting over the moors, and then I had a very short career with the Young People's Learning Agency, about 45 minutes. That's another story. And more recently, I was with the Learning and Skills Improvement Service for about 3 years. A range of exciting jobs. Should make it clear now, I'm now freelance, so this is my own personal interpretation, Colin, of the Ofsted Improvement landscape.
Fantastic. And again, it's good to have that checkered, probably not the right word, but that range of
Hey, hey.
topics.
Well, the 45 minutes was checkered.
Yes, I'm sure it was. But it's good to have that range of different topics and different perspectives. And obviously, you can't be within the education space without the word Ofsted coming up or some degree of inspection framework at any point in time. So it'd be very, very good. I'll let you drive if you take us through your ideas around Ofsted improvement, and then I'll take questions in via the instant messenger system and see what the audience thinks. Over to you.
Of course. Right, thanks, Colin. The title is Further Education and Skills, but I hope there's something here for everybody. And the timing that Colin and I have been discussing is around the imminent publication of the Chief Inspector's report that was published about this time of year last year. And from what I believe, it'll probably be out by the end of November. Your colleagues listening will probably be aware that last year, particularly around FE skills, but the schools sector, work-based learning as well, there was a great deal of headline sound bites there that caused quite a lot of debate, to say the least, around the sector, particularly around teaching, learning and assessment. And I want to speculate during the next few minutes whether that will happen again. I'm anticipating what the Chief Inspector might say, and I also want to explore Ofsted's new engagement with improvements. Now, when I researched this about 10 years ago, it was their strapline, Ofsted improvement through inspection. They're subtly revisiting this part of their new remit, and I want to share some thoughts with you how that might work out. Excuse me. I've just got Windows 8 and I'm not very expert at that. Now, in terms of the annual report last year, there was quite a lot of good bits, world-class bits in the Chief Inspector's report, but the negatives, of course, outweighed the positives. And you'll see from these slides, these points here, a lack of improvement, coasting, etc., accountability, leadership, governance, of course, and that must apply across all sorts of schools, higher education as well as further education in schools. A lot of noise around apprenticeships, and we can expect that to be revisited, of course. English and maths, the GCSEs issue was anticipated, and also this single soundbite teaching is still not good enough. Now, I'll just switch to a couple of the slides that the inspectorates used at this time, and that these are from when the excuse me a minute, when the here we go. just after the publication of the Chief Inspector's report. And here we have, this isn't the AOC conference, the annual one, this was a post-national AOC conference that was held just for colleges in the audience. And you'll see here that Ofsted are looking at value for money, they're looking for qualifications, etc. But they talk about the numbers of providers, and then they use these phrases, it's not good enough. And there will be a similar one for schools, etc. And this is pretty, you know, if these were my family in here, this looks pretty grim. 44% of the learners were judged less than good. And it goes on with some more data. Now, if we go down here, we come to the key messages. Some of these messages will be the same this year, but you'll see that the inspectorate focused on employability, skills for employability, the national prosperity, national league tables, etc. But there are messages in here for funders, etc. So those were the messages last year. One of the issues that also came up, as I've hinted, sorry, that's the wrong one, as I've hinted before, is the centrality of teaching, learning and assessment. And there was a separate presentation on this. We've got changes to the Common Inspection Framework, and then we've got more scrutiny of teaching, learning and assessment. The inspectorate, you'll see, gets to use assessment sometimes, but they do couple the three together. Now, if we look down here, this is a college example. We've got a table, these are, as I say, the inspectorate's data. We've got a table here of the colleges of the different grades. Now, what worries me here is this red line where the inspectorate are averaging the inspection grades. And we don't see this in the Chief Inspector's report, but I'm comfortable about this as a methodology for lots of reasons. I did a statistics degree a long time ago, but it's not from a particular statistical background. But the averaging of grades implies lots of things. One thing it does imply is that they are at the same interval apart. Grade 1, the difference between grade 1 and grade 2 is the same as, say, the grade 3 and grade 4. And I think there's something else as well, that the 1, 2, 3 and 4 actually aren't grades at all, are they? They're descriptors giving numbers just for shorthand, just for expediency purposes. So averaging these, I think, is difficult, but we could speculate on why it's this reductionist approach is used, and we've got this averaging. But you'll see there's a sort of pessimistic picture here. So if we go back to the slides here, this is what the Chief Inspector said last year. Some of the headlines. Many people listening to this may be familiar with DataView, a fairly new tool that the Inspectorate have been using. I say fairly new, it's been in use about a year, and if we can get onto it live, this is what it looks like. You can access it, you'll see the link up there. You can access it through the Ofsted website itself or through this link. And it allows you to analyse the situation in schools, early years, etc., social care, by local authorities. If we look at, just say that the learning and skills, we can break it down by providers, but we've got the data here presented in different formats. And if we look at the graphs here, this happens to have East Midlands compared to England. We see, I'll just get the colour coding there. We see we've got here the outstanding and good providers, the good ones, the inadequate, and the outstanding there. At the bottom, just move it up a bit, we've got a year-on-year total going back to 2009. They actually took a census mid-year that census point has dropped off the data view system, so that would have been, I think, March of 2013. It's in here. And it allows you to do a number of things. With learning and skills, we've got, sorry, that's the schools one. Learning skills up here. With learning skills, we've got two indicators: overall effectiveness and leadership and management. And you can see that the outstanding and good, the proportion of outstanding and good is going up. The proportion of inadequate is around 2%. The satisfactory requires improvement is going down over the last year. And that looks quite encouraging. What's interesting here is we've got leadership and management, we've got overall effectiveness. Going back to what I said earlier, the emphasis on teaching, learning and assessment, we only find that when we come to here on schools. So you can see we can make a comparison of the quality of teaching over time with schools, but we can't make a comparison of the quality of teaching in, say, an independent learning provider, that part of the sector compared to schools or whatever. So I think I know why that is. It's probably because that wasn't given a grade until 2012. It's a little strange because the inspectorates are saying now this is absolutely central to how good an organisation is, the teaching, learning and assessment. There's lots of other things you can do with data view. The inspectorate, of course, has the full data underneath this and will be able to tease out, say, differential performance by subjects, for example. So there's a feel there, perhaps, that things are getting better. But let's look at some of the narratives from the okay. This is my own personal table. I'm only looking at colleges here. You could do a similar narrative for other parts of the school or FE sector. As you can imagine, this is pretty laborious. Not being an insider, it's to get this sort of data requires assembling the inspection results as they're published. Overall effectiveness here, there are about 80 colleges have been inspected. I say about because we have sixth form colleges, we have independent specialist colleges, we have higher education institutes with further education going on inside them. We have community colleges, etc. This year that's just gone, 12-13, 2 further education colleges were inspected, which represents 2.5% of the overall proportion of colleges that we inspected is they're outstanding. That compares with a percentage of 4% in the previous year. We've got the percentages here for good, etc. Of course, what we've got from 2012 is this new concept of requires improvement. Previously, this grade 3 was satisfactory. But satisfactory doesn't imply any momentum, any direction of travel, etc. So the inspectorate of using requires improvement as a device, I think, to create some momentum around improvement. So we have requires improvement for the first time. If we go over here to teaching, learning, assessment, last year in colleges, 44% was good or outstanding. I got that figure off one of the inspectorate slides I showed you earlier on. It looks a lot better this year, a lot better. So things may be looking up around this central area of teaching, learning and assessment. I might just pause there, Colin, just to make sure there's no questions up to now, or it's making sense.
It certainly makes sense. There've been a few questions, but I think it's probably worth covering the next bit and then coming back to them, because I don't want to take you off this particular path. So there's some particular questions come in around why is English and maths particularly important, why the focus on employability. But I think we'll stick to this particular theme and then come back to those, because it'll have more impact.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's helpful to know that now, because what I'm looking at is what I've done here in the next couple of slides. I've picked out a couple of I've read nearly all the inspection reports, and I've picked out some things. So I'm beginning to imagine I might be Sir Michael Wilshaw writing his narrative in front of the fire, and these are the things might be saying. Well, I'm starting at the macro level, and it's about self-assessment, self-evaluation. From several of the reports I've read, over 12, 13, there are still issues around self-assessment, self-evaluation. The Inspectorate may well express in the report that it's not systematic, and particularly not focused on teaching, learning and assessment. And to do that, they're saying the evidence base needs to be pretty broad. There's loads of paradoxes here, because they also, I haven't put it down here, criticise self-assessments for being too long and discursive. So the shortest self-assessment I've seen is a single sign, therefore clearly that was data focused, but they're saying that the evidence base needs to be pretty broad, and here's the challenge, including the value added that organisations, schools, colleges, work-based learning providers add to those organisations to which learners progress. The employability argument is part of this. So the provision, the curriculum, the teaching starts to have this utility in terms of how it can enhance employability. And clearly learners need to be involved in self-assessments. For the first time this year, I've seen criticisms of variable quality within organisations. I know the Inspectorate have always seen quality across an organisation. When it's variable, they see that symptomatic of compromised leadership and management, because if at the senior level, if that's not strong, then quality can slip in different pockets of the organisation. They return to teaching and learning, saying it needs to be exciting and demanding, and also using real life scenarios. And again, this leitmotif of employability is important as well. I'll just go back to that last point there. Really crucial point. The emphasis on teaching, learning and assessment moves responsibility from teachers on enhancing learning rather than teaching. And there's, again, another potential paradox here, is that it is the role of the teacher in encouraging learning when the teacher isn't there. In other words, individual ownership of learning, learners taking control, the teachers setting the structure, setting the direction of travel, but independent learning is seen as absolutely crucial. And that includes students, learners having an idea of their own progress, as well as being involved in target setting. Another few things that might come out is the vocational context. Colleagues might have seen that the Commission on Vocational Teaching and Learning has involved commissioners that have been drawn from the industry, We've also had the report this week about qualifications and employabilities, etc. And it's talking about vocational expertise there as well, but without neglecting personal social, social skills as well, which opens another debate, doesn't it? Where does learning, especially in adult settings, where does it stop looking at employability and perhaps focuses on individual well-being? My mother's 85, I think, and she does a writing class. That's clearly not to enhance her employability, but it does help personal social skills. There's also an imperative coming up through some of the reports in that there should be a collegiate approach working with learners and ensuring that there is a shared understanding of the students' targets. The apprenticeship model is a particularly strong approach, apprenticeship delivery there. As money, the inspectorate will follow the funding, and as money goes through the hands of employers into local enterprise partnerships, I would anticipate the inspectorate looking at local enterprise partnerships particularly, and also I mentioned governance earlier on, and the governors are expected to be demonstrating accountability to communities as well, where the school, the college, the independent training provider is located. And again, there's lots of tensions there. A community-focused course may not be particularly successful in a conventional achievement sense, because people may get a lot of value from studying, from learning, but may not want to take the final assessment. So those two slides are areas that I suspect the narrative will pick up on in the reports. I haven't covered English and maths there in particular, but I suspect from Michael Gove's perspective, and certainly the Minister Matthew Hancock, this emphasis on English and maths, the GCSE changes, etc., those are the proxies for functional skills, employability skills. There's, going back for 6-10 years, there's always been complaints from employers that even graduates have poor standards of literacy. So the English and maths, again, are the imperative there, are linked, in my view, to the employability, to progression, to using qualifications as okay for personal development, but for a skill, a clear line of sight to the skills needs of the country. And again, I say the country, that may be expressed locally as well, where each local enterprise partnership is defining particular skills, shortages, for example, green technology, IT, or business admin. But all the skills plans I'm familiar with as well also talk about broader skills as well, the ability to work in teams, problem solving, etc., as well as actually good initial advice and guidance, the careers guidance, etc. So what I've done, I hope, over the last few minutes, I've gone back to the Inspectorate's own data, which shows an improving situation. I've picked out some of the analysis from individual inspection reports, both in terms of the overall grades and the narrative that might be the focus of the Chief Inspector's report. I've got some more to say on that, but I'd also like to explore where the Inspectorate might be going with their new improvement agenda. So I'm quite happy to take another pause, Colin, and see if
Sure.
there's any questions before
That's
moving on
yeah,
to
that's been really
improvement?
good. Just on the English and maths one, so specifically it was related as you picked up the changes in terms of requiring students to basically, if they've not achieved the grade at school level, that they don't get to duck it, and when they go to college, they have to continue the subject. A number of colleges and
Mm.
on the line already have basically said the real challenge of someone who is already demotivated in a particular area, just changing the building that they're in and asking them to sit the same thing again does look somewhat of a challenging situation to a college. A number of colleges have also sent in messages around the shortage of English and maths teachers, particularly maths, in the FE space. So
Mm.
not only the fact that they have the responsibility to deliver, but they don't necessarily have the resources to deliver against the responsibility. So I'm not suggesting that that is a particular, excuse. It's just a flag and uncomfortability and a series of questions around that area. And I don't know if you have a particular view.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I was in a college this morning discussing exactly this, and I'm glad that colleagues have picked up on the maths issues. It's also a difficulty for the inspectorate because maths expertise within the inspectorate is a challenge as well. And I used to teach maths, but I came to that um, as from teaching science. So I was never trained to teach maths. I was seen as somebody who could teach maths because I was trained as a science secondary teacher, and clearly that's flawed. So there's definitely something on teacher training. I think that's important here, and I might return to that point as well later on. I think there's an important question or perhaps challenge. How far does the deficit go back? Does it go back to year 9, year 8, or whatever, or is it more recent? Is it something that's only appears at the post 16 phase, or is it something that is happening at 12-year-olds or 11-year-olds, etc.? I don't have any answers. I know awarding bodies are looking at pre-GCSE maths and English qualifications to try and put in stepping stones. I think one perhaps simplistic answer, facile answer, would be that the motivation comes from developing the context, and if that context is motivating, say, I don't know, hairdressing or IT, then the maths will come alongside that. I'm sceptical that those two can be coupled up. I'm certain that over the next 12 months, these tensions will be exposed, and there has to be a response. There's got to be a funding response from the funding bodies as well for paying for repeating qualifications. As we move perhaps in a few minutes on to inspection and improvement, there's a responsibility here, isn't there, falls on the inspectorate, where they spot where it's working well, where they spot where the problem has been cracked, that they can highlight that and look for sharing expertise. But I don't think it's seen as a deficit, Colin. I certainly wouldn't see it as an excuse. It's a real, genuine problem where the policy is quite clear, but the architecture isn't yet in place and the support isn't yet in place to make sure that policy imperative is met.
Then
Perhaps we should visit this again in a few months and see what progress has been made.
absolutely. And another question that's come in, which you may want to take now or after your next slug, was around the issues you raised around self-assessment, and particularly the issue
Yeah.
of the validity of self-assessment if I have to go and show the added value I have given to other organisations. Because clearly,
Yes,
it doesn't. It's not rocket
that's right.
science that you will go to your friends and go, "Please sign this letter saying how I have added value to your
Yeah.
organisation, etc." Um,
Yeah. Yeah. It's really hard, isn't it? Let's illustrate another difficulty there. If we take a college return to the funding agency, that was moved forward with limited success this year to, I think it was the third week in October. One reason for moving that funding return forward was to allow destination to be captured earlier, because one of those fields in the return refers to learner destinations. So that's fine in practice, but how can you possibly have an accurate field of learner destinations to put in that field to be captured at the macro level by the funding agency, etc.? Organisations have a whole raft of tools to um, track the destinations of their learners. And I would suggest that many organisations are ahead of the game here. They really do keep in touch with their learners and their destinations, and they have a really good feel. The inspectorate use learner view and parent view, I think it's called, and employer view, to try and capture some of this. But I do think it's another one of the paradoxes behind the inspectorate's expectations that you could get destination data, you could get it quickly, but it's likely to be crude and not really very helpful for the self-assessment purposes. So I think perhaps the way forward here is to try and steer a line between what's practical, pragmatic, and getting the best possible information. I think it would be extremely unrealistic to have a systematic view of where learners go when they've left your control. That's perverse, isn't it? Happens in higher education, where universities, for example, are held to account in the key information sets by what their students are doing 6 months along the line. That's through interviews, etc., and returns. So I'm not sure what the answer is. I know there are answers out there, but again, there are perversities in how the funding agency behaves and the inspectorate's expectations here. That's not a very helpful response, Colin, but I think from my personal view, I think I flagged it up. I'm pretty certain it's something the inspectorate will be interested in, and I think if the organisation has also recognised it as a priority and there's work in progress, I think that can only be commended by the inspectorate.
Fantastic. Well, there's more questions, but I
It'd be
think
interesting to know. There are probably many people on the line who either work for the inspectorate part-time or even full-time who would have a view on that.
no, that's good. I think that's probably enough questions at this stage. If you wanted to kind of carry on with your kind of almost
Okay.
final conclusions, I'm sure we can take a couple afterwards.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course. Now, what I'm really interested in now is that the inspectorate are getting involved in improvements. And as I say, the last time I saw this made explicit was probably 2004-5. This is written down. This isn't my interpretation for once. Excuse me. And what I've done, I've taken this extract from the inspection handbook. It's the Further Education and Skills Inspection Handbook. And here Ofsted bravely claim inspection does these things. It makes things better by doing these things. Incidentally, colleagues have probably noticed it was updated quietly over the summer, the inspection handbook for further education skills. It's still titled September 12, but it was updated. And if you use Word to compare the two documents, there's 400 25 changes, but this bit hasn't changed. So they're saying improvement and inspection goes together by the inspection framework setting out exemplars that organisations should aspire to. They use the word effectiveness here, and they don't define effectiveness in sufficiently enough detail for me. What is effective is effective having good success rates? Is it having happy staff, etc.? So effectiveness, perhaps we shouldn't take that for granted. The second one, increasing the provider's confidence by evaluating the self-assessment, etc., and offering a professional challenge. I'm interested in the reverse here as well, where the providers, the school, the college, etc., confidence has been negatively impacted by the inspectorate's evaluation, and that can totally dominate, can't it, the next 12 months, 18 months or so. The inspectorate can set very rapid timescales for improvement that may not be compatible, say, the head's own timescales for changing culture or building his or her senior team, etc. The third point is saying, hey guys, to get better you do these things. We recommend these priorities. And again, this is interesting because, of course, you'd be foolish not to pay serious attention to these priorities. But supposing the priorities aren't compatible with your vision, with your mission, or supposing you follow the priorities as best as you can, and the inspectorate says, well, your still requires improvement, etc. So I think that's an interesting one. Constructive dialogue between inspectors and senior leaders and staff. And I think that's a really important one. Inspectors, full-time inspectors, and you reminded me of this the other day, Colin. What they do, what their job is they inspect. They're not leaders, they're not managers, they're not historians. They are inspectors. They are experts in applying a particular evaluation framework. That evaluation framework will lead them to define what's good, what's outstanding, etc. I would suspect that the senior leaders and staff are probably more contemporary experts in either leadership or in providing, well, let's say good English or maths. So this is interesting. I know from personal experience, this constructive dialogue has been signposting organisations to other organisations that perhaps further along an improvement journey, and that's fine. But what you're asking there is, for example, the head of an organisation not only to be a good leader, but also to have the skills to create the ability to change others as well, other organisations, to interact with different cultures, different settings, etc. And certainly there's a literature, isn't there, that says that sharing good practice doesn't work. There's potentially no such thing as good practice. There's practice that works well in a particular setting, but perhaps it's not transferable. And then we go on to the point we talked about a little earlier. The self-assessment is not the self-assessment that's important. It's about using it to get better. And the final point they say is about identifying best practice, both through highlighting things in inspection reports, but also survey reports as well. And they are holding now best practice events where organisations can go and listen to experts, excuse me, etc., about what's working well. At the moment, in the further education and skills sector, these events are by invitation. The inspectorate will invite you. They will focus on the requires improvements constituents, but they will also invite organisations that are good or even outstanding, but where the desk work, the desk analysis has shown the there are pockets of there's pockets of issues there. So what I'm not certain about now, there's a debate about whether inspection does those things. What I'm not sure whether the inspectorate will accept some co-responsibility for improvements where perhaps it doesn't happen, where it doesn't go according to the choreographed timescales in the policies, etc. Where an organisation in, say, under a notice to improve or special measures follows the priorities set out by the inspectorate, but they don't work. So I'm interested in what this looks like in practice, and we're beginning to see the inspectorate perhaps recognising some of this. If you're in the college or work-based learning sector, I hope you've seen this letter that arrived. Several letters arrived over the summer from either the Minister, Matthew Hancock, or from the Inspectorate. And it's a quite conciliatory opening paragraph here. And this does contrast with the rhetoric in the last year's Chief Inspector's annual report where things weren't good enough. So I'm not sure whether any of this sentiment will transfer into the Chief Inspector's report. But this letter, and if you haven't seen it, this is a verbatim extract. This is said, this is what the Ofsted 7 national priorities are. This is for further education and skills. There may well be, I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't a similar letter in other settings. Hey, increased impact of inspection. If you're an inspectorate, you've got to say that. And if you look back at the graphs that we were looking at earlier, there has been some static provision for some time. The improvement work we've spoken about. The English and Maths, focusing in on that. And for the first time, 14 to 16-year-olds can enrol directly at colleges. So they'll be looking at that, the traineeship, study programs, etc. Interestingly, I think it's unlikely that the inspector will have access to data on this until this time next year because of the data returns I told you about. So organisations will have to have data for this cohort. We've got, of course, the accountability issue that was there last time. The vocational training, no surprise there from what we've discussed. Quality of teaching, learning and assessment is there as well. Those are the inspectorate's national priorities. So you would imagine that those are issues that are coming up in the Chief Inspector's national report. But there's other ones as well. If you look further at, into the letter, it's about the quality of teacher training. If your organisation that provides teacher training as a, if you like, a subject, sector subject area, the inspectorate are going to be looking at the collateral impact of that on the quality of teaching in the college, school, work-based learning organisation, on the basis that if you're good at training teachers, your staff should be good teachers as well. The link with CPD, which takes us into, I think this is probably a final point, Colin. Last year, the inspectorate highlighted performance management. It's not there this year. I can't imagine that they imagine that performance management is perfect in the organisations. I'm sure it's still work in progress. What they are looking for is how teachers, how middle managers, how senior managers are held to account for the quality of teaching, learning and assessment. how the organisation puts in effective continual professional development to support any deficits, and where deficits can't address, how the performance management kicks in. So for me, performance management was there last year as a priority. I'm a little surprised it's not there, but it may come through on the leadership aspect, etc. But I was interested to see the inspectorate for the first time are defining these priorities. So those will apply for the to the inspections now underway. So this letter needs to be looked at in the context of the Common Inspection Framework and the Inspection Handbook. Okay, Colin, that's I think
That,
most of what I was going to say.
absolutely, and I think that's been an awful lot of food for thought. So I'm conscious of time, so I'm only going to take one final question, and this was around
Okay.
effectively the real challenge for Ofsted or any inspection framework is always people do what you inspect rather than what you expect. And how much is
Yeah.
this a
Yeah.
challenge for any inspection process? That ultimately, however you do the system, people will effectively focus their efforts on what you're going to inspect, not necessarily on what will make the biggest difference to the learner's achievement.
Yeah, and I can only agree with that sentiment. You would inevitably do what was safe to be inspected. And um, what's interesting here, Colin, I think, is that recently in the further education and skills, over the last year, the inspections have been um, no notice or 2 or 3 days notice. Sorry, the no notice model was piloted over um, the previous year. That was too difficult in complex logistical situations. Ofsted was spending an awful lot of time turning up to premises that were empty because the learners were somewhere else out on placement. So the short notice gives very little opportunity for dialogue between the lead inspector and the organisation about how representative the inspector's proposed brief for what they're going to look at. How representative is it? Are the best is the best provision being inspected? Is the really exciting stuff in scope? And what might be interesting for the inspectorate to look at is small pockets of provision that is groundbreaking, that is risk-taking. And what concerns me about what your questioner says is that the ultimate outcome of inspection, when it is so potentially punitive, is that it can create a conservative atmosphere within organisations where people behave, creates a safety where things are safe to be inspected rather than being brave. And there was a model for teacher training in further education skills a while ago where the inspection was split in two, 6 months apart, where suggestions for improvement were left at the end of the first one, and they returned 6 months later to look at how that was going. Very much a longitudinal process rather than a snapshot. It's a very, very interesting point. The inspectorate would say that they are, of course, on the side of the learners, the employers, etc., so that they need to access the truth. It's something, again, I think we could return to in a few months, and it pervades, as you said, inspection methodologies right across public services. Children's services is very much in the news for lots of disappointing reasons at the moment. Higher education inspection is a different methodology, a peer-based approach that government may see as less assertive and less rigorous. I think it's right, though, Colin, to acknowledge it as a a serious point that should be recognised.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for your time this afternoon. I think that's been an excellent roller coaster ride through a series of really challenging areas for the sector, both in further education and obviously in the school environment. This session will be has been recorded, so it'll be available online. And if you have liked it, please use the hashtag VivoEdChat or get in touch and suggest other topics. So a big thank you to Colin Forrest for his time this afternoon, and we'll be ending the webinar now.